guess I'm going to have to tell the whole story to understand why I am this way. We all have our dark times, and I've been keeping secret the lowest point in my life for so long. I need to tell it, and, well, I need you to listen. I was in my 20s and everything had been going so well up until my 26th birthday. I had a stable job, girlfriend, and led a relatively content life that all started to rot away in a series of unfortunate events that claimed my job, my romance, and my home in quick succession. I think it was the culmination of those events that caused me to drag a cheap convenience store razor across my wrists. The first event that caused the domino effect that resulted in the implosion of my life was losing my job. The reason my boss gave me for letting me go was a struggling economy. I tried to hold on to my job and even offered to take a pay cut, but it was too late and her mind was made up. After I lost my job, my relationship crumbled away next. I moved in with my girlfriend, and it was a move that I now realize was a stupid mistake. It only took a few weeks of us living together with me living a do-nothing life before she dumped me, and I moved into my parents' house. I was home for about a month before my parents had had enough of me. I don't blame them. They could only put up with me getting drunk and behaving raucously so many times before I expended all their patience. They kicked me out, and I moved into the cheapest motel I could find. I used the last of my savings staying in that crappy motel before I spent the last of my funds buying the cheap disposable razor in the motel convenience store. I'll gloss over the reasons why I did it. It being slicing open my wrists with a razor. To tell you the truth, I can't even remember my reasons why I thought suicide was the right choice. I don't really even know if there are right reasons for killing yourself. At the time, I thought the fact that I couldn't find another job, another girlfriend, or a place to live were sufficient reasons for me to end it all. They all seemed like suitable reasons. I thought I was being so poetical. I bought a cheap razor and brought it to my equally cheap motel room. I sat in front of my cheap motel desk, turned off all the lights, lit a few candles, set a song by Hugo Wolf to play while I did the foolish deed. I listened to the song for a few minutes before I dragged the razor across both of my wrists. I thought of my reasons for doing it. The most prevalent reason being that I wanted to stop the struggle. I wanted it to end. And I sat on the desk and watched the blood drain from my wrists onto the already stained white carpet while listening to Hugo Wolf. Before I thought, a moment of clarity sprang into my mind. I had so many reasons why I wanted to end it all, but I didn't think of the one reason why I had to survive. And it outweighed all my reasons for ending it. I didn't want it all to end just yet. I opened my eyes and watched the puddle of blood accumulating on the floor. It wasn't until I saw how much blood had collected on the floor that I realized how dire it was for me to get help. Tiny crimson rivers were cascading from the wounds on my wrist. I shouted out, "Help! I need someone to call an ambulance." I listened for a response and I heard nothing back. There was no one around, and if I wanted to get help, I would need to leave my room and find it. I stood up from my chair. A sudden feeling of dizziness swept over me, and I wobbled back and forth, desperately trying to keep myself upright and level. I looked at the door that was only a few feet away. I had to get out in the hallway to get someone to help me. I shakily lifted my right foot and took another tentative step forward. The blood loss had taken too profound a toll on me, and I collapsed face first into the dirty carpet. I tried to rise from the prone position, but at that moment, it seemed as likely as me climbing Mount Everest in my underwear. It's hard to describe how I felt at that time. The closest facsimile I can compare it to be like lying in a bed after having way too much to drink. The room felt like it was oscillating. I also felt so cold, and a sudden desire to sleep was overcoming me. I realize now that it was the loss of blood that made me feel so cold and tired. My mind was growing foggy, and I couldn't quite think straight. But I realized that going to sleep would mean death for me. I couldn't get to my feet, so I did the next best thing. I brought my right arm forward and began to drag myself forward along the carpet towards the door. Each movement left a little bloody stain on the carpet as I army crawled my way to salvation. I did this motion a few times. I raised my head thinking that the door had to be only a few inches away, but the blood loss had severely impaired my judgment. I had barely moved away from the desk. The door looked like it was at the end of a tunnel. I continued to drag myself to the door. I felt so tired that I thought I would pass out, so cold that I would freeze. Each exertion brought me closer and closer to my goal. The door seemed monochrome and hazy. I kept my head facing the door because it felt like if I rested my head on the carpet, I would pass out immediately. I brought my left arm ahead of me and pulled myself forward. I dimly thought that I was giving my arms one hell of a rug burn dragging myself like this. I always did have that habit of missing the forest for the trees. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before I reached the door. My hand bounced off the door and my heart leapt for joy in my chest. I had to get out into the hallway, I just had to. But my thoughts stopped dead when I had a strange sensation that I was not alone in my room. Since then, I have done some research about blood loss and learned that if the brain is deprived of enough oxygen, it can trigger hallucinations. I need to keep telling myself what I encountered in that cheap motel room was nothing more than a hallucination. I craned my head so I could face the bed where I felt the sensation of eyes on me. There was something in the darkness in one of the room's corners. I had turned out the lights and the candles didn't illuminate the room enough for me to see it clearly. I wasn't even sure it was alive until I noticed that it was moving slightly. Ever so slightly. It was slowly approaching me. It moved within range of the candle. I could see it more clearly. It's hard to describe, and that may be due to the blood loss or my desire not to try and remember it. It was a human-esque figure, but there was something odd about the limbs. It looked like they had been broken and allowed to heal incorrectly multiple times. Its body groaned and its joints clicked as it moved towards me, and I watched it approach in utter fascination and shock. Looking at it brought back a memory from my childhood. I was homesick from elementary school and my mom was busy calling the doctors. In unsupervised boredom, I turned on the TV and came across a documentary about the Holocaust narrated by Alfred Hitchcock. Seeing the gaunt figure slowly approaching me reminded me of the corpses of those Holocaust victims and made me recall the same amount of dread as I watched man's atrocities to man, as I stared at this thing with my eyes transfixed. The creature's head was bent at a 90-degree angle. It moved in slow, jerky movements. Its eyes were sunk in shallow sockets. It twitched spasmodically, and a low, rasping breath emerged from its throat. That was enough to break me out of my trance. I needed to get away from that thing. I reached up and my hand bounced futilely off the handle. The creature was closer. It was thinner than I had previously thought. It looked like skin hung loosely on its skeletal frame. I brought my hand up and tried to grasp the door handle once again. I managed to wrap my fingers around it. But when I cut my wrist, I must have cut into a tendon because when I depressed the handle to open it, it slid out of my grasp. I put all my focus on getting the door opened. I didn't have any more time to look at the creature. I was beginning to black out. The world had grown monochrome with everything looking like I was seeing it in tunnel vision. I made one last attempt and was met with success. My hand grasped the handle just as I felt the thing grasp onto my ankle. If the thing's touch hadn't galvanized me into action, then the rasping worded groan certainly did the trick. It rasped a single word. Join. Its grip on my leg tightened painfully. I depressed the door handle and pulled it with all my rapidly fading strength. It felt like it weighed hundreds of pounds. It swung open and I put my left arm in the way to keep it from closing. I tried to pull myself into the hallway, but its grasp of my ankle was too strong. It felt like it was cutting off my circulation and trying to pull me back into the room that would be my tomb. I gave a hoarse cry, and with the last of my strength, I threw myself into the hallway. The last thing I remember hearing was the door softly clicking shut behind me, with the creature rasping. Please, don't leave me. I woke up in a hospital. Apparently, someone had come across me in the hallway. I was incredibly lucky as they had enough medical know-how to apply pressure to my cut wrists while waiting for the ambulance. I spent a few weeks in the psych ward. I didn't think that was necessary. I had made my decision. I had struggled so hard to live that I knew that there was something in my life worth living for, even if I didn't know it at the time. I kept telling myself that what I saw in a motel was a figment of an oxygen-depraved brain. It worked. I told myself that story as I rebuilt my life, found a new job, I moved out and settled down with a nice girl. I kept telling myself that story even as the nurse took off the bandages to disinfect my stitching. She swapped some betadine on my wrists and then pulled off my slipper, and then did the same to the deep cut that was on my right ankle. Told myself I had been injured while crawling toward the hallway. But at night, when I'm in the dark with my thoughts, I remember the creature and its tight grip on my right ankle. And I remember its nails digging into me as it rasped. Please, don't leave me. You're right to be scared of the dark. You know that feeling you get when the covers are pulled up to your face? When you're lying in the dark with your eyes open but too afraid to look? That feeling that makes you a child again, holding your breath while you say to yourself, if I don't look, maybe it'll go away. You muster your courage to stare back at the watcher in the dark. It'll be gone. If you're lucky. Well, I'm not. Let me tell you about when my life fell apart. It was 1982. I was in the kitchen. Mom said that there was no such thing as monsters. I can hear it now, clear as day. You're too old for that crap. She spoke over her shoulder from the stove. I've been having nightmares and she couldn't keep waking up in the middle of the night. Work started early and ended late. That's kid stuff, Johnny. I saw the dark circles under her eyes and the way her face sagged with fatigue. She was working double shifts to make ends meet, and it was wearing her thin as a coin passed through too many hands. I need to rest, she said. She wasn't telling me as much as she was pleading, and even as a kid I could hear the difference. That made my part in it worse. The pan rattled across the burner, and I could smell the sausages browning. It was Sunday, so breakfast was more than Wonder Bread and peanut butter. Granddad sat in the kitchen too. He was drinking his morning coffee from an off-white mug with a chipped rim. He had a cigarette in his other hand, and when he wasn't taking a drag, his hand was on the table next to his GPCs, like he was guarding them. Granddad called them good people's cigarettes. His nose was almost as red as the Marlboros he couldn't afford since he'd been laid off. He coughed, his face blue with the effort, but as soon as he could breathe again, the cigarette was back in his mouth. Mom dropped 2 links on my plate from the sizzling pan. When I was your age, I was already working odd jobs to help out. I didn't know what to say, so I kept my mouth shut, and I wasn't keeping my folks up half the night. Granddad rescued me. He knows, Tammy. Give it a rest. He looked at me, and I could see that he was asking for assurance. I was just a kid, but also somehow the fulcrum in which the family's troubles pivoted. Maybe that's not entirely true, but it seemed that way to me. I was a mouth to feed, a knot keeping the ends from meeting. Those dark circles, that tired sag that pulled at her mouth. One way or another, life was using Mom up. By stealing her sleep, I was tightening its grip. Shame's heavy, and it bent me just then. Granddad noticed me sag in my chair. Johnny's just shook up. He'll be all right. He didn't look so sure, but he gave me a nod anyway. Right? Yeah, I knew I was lying. So did Mom, but she kept her peace and dropped 2 dollops of scrambled eggs next to the links on my plate. High cotton. That's what Granddad said about sausage and eggs. I didn't feel it though. Not that morning. He used a fork to cut the links into bits and to mix everything together. He usually liked mine separate and made sure no egg touched sausage. But I watched them meet in the middle as though they were best friends. I lost my appetite somewhere so far off that even the smell of Jimmy Dean couldn't call it back. He watched me scooting my sausages around, took a long pull from a cigarette, and winked. His eyes were playful. Mom joined us with a plate of her own. Ah, shit. I forgot the toast. In a moment, she was back with a small plate stacked with 5 or 6 slices of white bread, a bit more burnt than brown. Eat up, she said. I did, one joyless bite at a time. High cotton. That's what Sunday morning meant. Sunday afternoon was a lazy affair at my house, and this one was no exception. Granddad leafed throughout old magazines, nodding off now and then. The pages were dog-eared, and he'd read the stories before, but he didn't mind. Mom washed her hair in the bathroom sink and took a long nap. I went outside while Mom slept. It was sunny and hot, and I decided to poke around in the shed. It was under an old maple and dappled with shade and sun and summer camouflage. The shed was never locked because there was nothing worth stealing. I opened the door and stepped in. It smelled like rust and oil and old wood, and the light that shone through its only window spotlighted the dance and swirled the dust in the air. I poked around a bit, looking for something, anything, that might take my mind off of Mom. I had a file in one hand, and I was wearing away at the head of one of the bolts attaching to a beat-up vise to the work table. Each push gave a raspy sound and the glint of shiny new steel. One push carried my knuckles too far, and I scraped them across the sharp edge of the vise. It peeled the skin back, and the blood welled up under the curl. I stuck my hand in my mouth and tasted the metallic tang. My knuckles stung, and I winced as I ran my tongue over the flap of skin. And then I saw it. In the corner of my eye, I could just make out a shadow, blacker than the black against which it stood. Two long arms with long hands and long fingers that looked more like claws to me. It was just my imagination. No, it's not John. My father's voice. My eyes were on the workbench, but I focused on the shadow without looking. It grew, stretching in the dark, raising those long, fingered hands. My breath caught. I dropped the file and it clung to the wood floor. I forgot about my knuckle. The hair on my arm stood up and I could feel my heart skipping, starting, faster, pounding, trying to escape my chest. I was too scared to look at it directly. I thought about running for the door, but the shadow is right there, just beside it. I had long arms. I'd never make it. I edged to the light of the window, trying my best not to look. I thought that maybe, if I just ignored it, it'd go away. But you tell yourself that too, don't you? Late at night. Something in me knew better. Something in you does too, I bet. It was moving, inching toward the most closest door. It was pretending not to look, but it took another sideways step into the light. I could feel the sun on my skin. In the light, the darkness deepened. I couldn't make out the shadow anymore, but I knew it was there. It's there all right, Johnny. Don't you doubt it. Now the voice was Granddad's. The door closed with a thud. My chest ached from the effort of keeping my breath in check. I had to do something. I grabbed a hammer, a big heavy one with a painted red wooden handle. You stay away from me, I yelled. I mean it, you just... My words died in my throat. It was there. I could see it now, blacker than black, getting darker every second. It was creeping closer, sliding like it was on rails. My hands shook and my lower lip began to quiver. White-hot panic burned in my mind. In every thought but run was smoke in its wake. But I was frozen, and my feet wouldn't budge. It stopped at the edge of the light. It slid around the side, staying just beyond the patch of white on the floor. It was close, really close. The light was small, but it was everything. Mom wasn't much on church, and she never taught me to pray, but I'd prayed my heart out that some passing cloud didn't happen by just then. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I wasn't holding my breath. I was trying to take one, and it wouldn't come. We stood like that for a long time. The hammer got heavy, my arms ached, but I didn't dare lower my guard. I was trying to get behind me when the shed door opened. What the hell are you doing? Mom asked. She noticed the wet patch on my jeans. What the hell, John? I stood there, lip quivering, hair held high, until she took me by the arm and dragged me out into the yard and the sunlight, and into the house. She was angry about my wet jeans, but I didn't care. Mom was making dinner in the kitchen. Granddad and I were in the living room. He was on the couch. I was on the floor, sitting Indian style. He turned off the TV and wasn't watching it anyway. "What's wrong, Johnny?" He took a long pull and breathed out through his nose. His face was wreathed in blue smoke. I eyed the window. Sun was setting, and it would be dark soon. Nothing," I said, trying to guess how long the light would hold, watching the shadows grow across the front yard. "Doesn't look like nothing to me," he said. "Come up here and talk, man to man." I joined him on the couch and he crushed the nub of his cigarette into the ashtray. It was brown glass, made to look like amber. "What's wrong?" he asked, tousling my hair. "Nothing." He could see that it was something, and the tousling stopped. He caught my eye with a long, sideways look of one milky brown eye. Some men think they should keep their troubles to themselves. Not me. A trouble shared is a trouble lessened, I say. He paused for a breath or two, and I could hear how mad his lungs were. "What's your trouble, Johnny?" "In the shed." Well, it was too ridiculous to even say. Kid stuff. It was my mom's voice in my head. "You're too old for that crap." "What about the shed?" "Well, You saw something, didn't you?" I nodded. "I thought you might. The nightmares." He coughed, one of the really bad ones that doubled him over and brought tears to his eyes. "They're just not nightmares, Johnny." He wet his eyes and his voice was high, tight, and wheezy. "Some folks are more sensitive. The nightmares let you know when it's around." That got my attention like a slap. "But what do you mean?" He had recovered and his hand wandered over to the pack of GPCs. "Well, some folks see things other folks can't, or won't." He had my eye again, and I could feel his intensity. "You follow me?" He fished the cigarette out of the pack and held it unlit, rolling it in his fingers. "I guess you're at that age now. That age when either you stop seeing it or start seeing it more than you'd like." The way he said it quickened the hair on the back of my neck. Every follicle was alive and tingling. "The shadow." My voice was barely whisper. "Yeah," he said. I was stunned. It was like I'd known a secret that no one else can share. And suddenly, I found out that everyone already knows. Granddad knew. He'd seen it too, as real as the shadow had been. This was impossible to believe. "You see it too?" I asked. He looked at a cigarette in his hand and then back to me. "Yeah." "Really?" He nodded, a slow motion move of his head. "You be careful, Johnny. Some things lose their power when you say them aloud." I found out that this wasn't one of them. It was way worse after he had admitted that it was dangerous. Way worse. I was about to ask more when Mom came in. She didn't want to hear this and I knew it, and I couldn't bear to make it harder on her. "Dinner," she said. "Later. We'll talk about it later." Mom had a double shift the next day and went to bed early. Granddad and I waited until we were sure she was asleep. I watched the windows like a hawk. It was full dark and the hair on my arms was at attention. He took one last glance at the hall. Then, his voice as low as a cricket's belly, he said, "Johnny, you got to watch out now." Hearing him say that gave me the shivers. Once it knows you can see it, it'll come for me, won't it? I asked, barely able to get the words out. He was having the same trouble, so he nodded. Millions, hell, billions of parents tell their kids that there's nothing in the dark that's not there during the light. You've done it yourself, haven't you? You repeat it until you believe it, or nearly so. And you hope your kids believe it too. But maybe it's you who need to believe. Maybe it's you who need the consultation. Maybe because you know, deep down, that there are things that go bump in the night. I knew it, and so did Granddad. I'm gonna watch over you tonight. You'll be as safe as houses, I promise. That helped a little. But I'm not always going to be here. I shook my head, but he continued. And when I'm not, you'll need to keep watch yourself. You hear me? Yeah, the word was more breath than speech. Good. When the nightmares come on heavy, that's a sign it's around. Why does it? I'm not sure. Maybe it feeds on us at night, stealing a little bit of you when you sleep. He lit a new cigarette from the old one and puffed it to life. I think it comes for those who can see it, and maybe ignores them that can't, or won't. You know what I mean? I did. Even if Mom saw it, she would convince herself that she hadn't. I said so, and he nodded. Yeah. His tone told me that he wanted to be a little more like Mom. But what can I do? I mean, to stay safe? The light, Johnny. Stay in the light. Neither of us could bear to talk about it anymore. There are things you could say in the daylight that you won't dare in the dark. Instead, we watched Hogan's Heroes and Sanford and Son with the volume down low so as not to wake Mom. Normally, we'd have been laughing, but that night we didn't even crack a smile. It was getting late and Granddad told me to get ready for bed. I had the covers up like a shield. The lamp was on and my room was fairly well lit. The overhead was busted, but it had always been busted and there was a problem with the wiring. Granddad was in the corner in a battered fabric chair. He was wearing his red and black plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he had a big, silver Rayovac Sportsman with him. The kind that took 2 D-cell batteries. Something about the chrome reminded me of a knight's sword. Felt a lot better with him there. I'll watch over you. I tucked my head under the blankets. I didn't want to see it. I was tired and scared, but my eyes were heavy. At some point, I fell asleep. I woke up suddenly. Granddad was still in the corner, but his flashlight was on, and he was shining it under the bed. I sat up, and he saw that I was awake. His face was pale as fresh paint, and the Rayovac shook in his hand. I could hear the batteries rattle. Don't get out of bed. What? Why? I rubbed my eyes. I was still a bit groggy. It's under the bed, Johnny. I was wide awake then. Don't get out of the bed. He repeated. He wasn't asking. I jumped to my feet, the saggy mattress bouncing slightly under my weight. What do you mean? It's under the fucking bed. Don't move. I was 10 years old, and I never heard Granddad so much as say shit. This was bad. Really bad. I couldn't stay on the bed, no way, no how, so I ran the step or two at the end of the mattress and jumped off for all I was worth. No, Granddad yelled. I traveled too far and too fast and hit the window in midair, flattening the blinds and tangling in them, ripping them from the wall when I fell backwards toward the bed. Towards the bed. Granddad was off the chair in an old man's flash, but my hand was falling into the shadow even as I tried to stop it. Upside down on the floor, I could see it too, flat as a doormat in the shadow under the bed. I snatched my hand to my chest as it reached for me, and not even a hair's breadth separated its fingers from mine. It was cold and misty, like my hand in the freezer to get ice. Jesus, Johnny. I'm okay, I said, finding my feet. I hopped up and down like it was Christmas morning. I'm okay. I was yelling, but I didn't know it. Granddad didn't either. But we figured it out when Mom burst through the door. What the hell? She said, her bathrobe trailing behind her like a cape. John, Mac, what the hell is going on? Her hands were on her hips, and her face was as red as Granddad's nose. She pointed a finger at Granddad. If that had been a gun, he would have been dead. You, out. He gave me one long, pitiful look and said, Mom stood her ground like a titan, and he drudged into the hall past her, his head down, defeated, worried, and afraid. Then it was my turn. You, in the bed. But now, what was I supposed to say? That there was a monster under the bed? That I needed Granddad to keep watch? Haven't your kids said the same thing? I picked up the flashlight and leapt into the bed. Not flounced, not jumped, leapt. Like Bruce fucking Jenner in the Olympics. When I get home, John, that threat needed no conclusion. She turned and slammed the door, but not before she switched off the lamp. I sat with the flashlight on, and I knew it wouldn't be enough. I was on the tracks tied to the rails, and the train was coming, and there was no hero waiting just off screen to run in and save the day. It was really dark in there, and there wasn't even a light peeking under the door. It was in its element. I could hear Mom giving it to Granddad in the kitchen down the hall, but I couldn't concentrate on the words. My heart was at least as loud as her cursing, and my mouth felt like it'd never known a sip of water. I had the flashlight in one hand like a spear, and I was shining the light at the edges of the bed, moving frantically from this side to that, from the headboard to my feet and back again. It was waiting, savoring my fear. That's when Mom came in the instant before the bulb blew. She saw it, and her mouth dropped open and her eyes grew just like they did on Saturday morning cartoons. I heard her take a loud breath, the substance of scream filling her lungs, but it was black now, and there was a rush of air, and she was gone. She was gone. My socked feet slid on the kitchen floor, and I smashed into the cabinet hard enough to send my head spinning. The flashlight skittered across the tired, yellow linoleum. Granddad overturned the table. He saw something too, because it was just a few moments before I could get him to see me or answer my frantic questions. It had been right behind me in the hall, all the way to the edge of the kitchen. We waited there till morning. That sounds crazy. I know it, but we did. Even then, every light in the house was on, and we searched my room for Mom. Of course, we never found her. Folks think she ran out, just like Dad did. That the double chefs and bells and me and Granddad were just too much in the end. We know better. I knew better. Well, that was 1982, a long time ago. Granddad and me had a hard time of it. Soon enough, I was working those odd jobs to make ends meet. They never really did. Not even close. Granddad passed before too long, and I got more help from the state and foster care. Willis's weren't so bad, and Fred and Rita did as well by me as they could. I sold the house when I turned 18. I got stacks of bulbs in the kitchen closet. 60 watts, 100 watts, fluorescents, you name it. My lights are all rigged to a master switch in each room too. One flip, and everything's lit. I won't have it any other way. When the nightmares come, when they do come, I keep the lights on all night. The flashlight, the Rayovac has been replaced by a mag light rechargeable, and I keep a Q-beam by the bed, just in case. Every room has a few lamps and an overhead. The wiring's like new. I want you to know that when you get that terrible feeling, the feeling of being watched from the dark, you're not alone. When you pull the blankets up like a shield and slide your head down and pull your feet up, I do it too. When you feel a watching from the dark or pull back a cold hand dangling over the side of the bed, when you feel like a kid and try to tell yourself there's nothing there but your imagination, even though you know there's something there. There is. Kids go missing all the time, don't they? And sometimes they die in their sleep even though there's nothing wrong with them. And sometimes parents just get up and go when they've had enough. But maybe, just maybe, not all those kids ran away. And maybe those that die see something before they do. And sometimes, and just sometimes, those parents didn't run off and times got hard. And you're right to be afraid of the dark and what's in it.